George, thank you for accepting our invitation from People Helping People under Access Link Consulting. Our relationship goes for years, and it's a real pleasure for us to have you here today.
Thank you, Rami, for having me here today. It's a pleasure working with you, and it has been for the past 10 years or so that I've known you for. I'm very happy to be here today and being part of People Helping People under Access Link.
To start with, George, could you please introduce us to Urban Link Architects and tell us more about its history and its values?
Yes, Urban Link Architects initiated about 20 years ago or so. It's a family-owned business. It was kicked off initially by my brother Tony. At the time, I was still young and going through my studies, and as I came of age, I started to be more involved with the business and slowly started to move up the ranks and take control of projects. And since then, Tony has started to take his foot out the door and has moved into development, and I've taken more of a leadership role and now look after all the projects within the business. In terms of values of Urban Link, we're committed to continuously improving and delivering the best products for our clients, and not having the one-size-fits-all mentality. We like to have every building designed specifically as per the client's request and designed to meet certain site requirements.
So George, this will lead me to my second question on what distinguishes Urban Link Architects from other firms in its design philosophy and specifically in NDIS projects.
Yeah. As I mentioned, when the company was small in size, we focused mainly on smaller residential projects. But as the company rapidly grew, we started to realize that the focus is mainly on mid-rise density residential. And what Urban Link was able to do very quickly is being able to deliver a project from concept sketch all the way to approval and taken all the way to occupation certificate. So being able to deliver the whole package and not just a design on paper or being specialists in one field. With regards to NDIS apartments, as we built a relationship with consultants, including Access Link, this has opened up our minds as architects, and it's led us to try and think outside the square rather than design typical apartments that we have in the past. The NDIS scheme has had many positive attributes to the way we design, and not only that, but when it comes to the complete product, having the end users occupy the space and seeing the final outcome is a great achievement, not only for us as designers, also for the construction team, but more specifically for those end users. The most important project that, in my view, has led to the success of Urban Link being involved with NDIS product is the Navali project by Urban Property Group in Penrith, which had 18 NDIS high physical support apartments. David Chandler, the building commissioner, was there on the opening day, and this project opened up the project. And to me, this was an eye-opener for the industry and was the start of something new.
Yeah, I remember this project clearly, and I think it's one of the beautiful deliveries from Urban Property Group for the community and specifically the NDIS SDA apartments. What I hear from you is that, and what I know as well, is that Urban Link created an impact in the community. So my question is, how has Urban Link impacted the community, and how has the philosophy of People Helping People influenced your approach in the design?
The philosophy of People Helping People is the basis of generating greater choice for the community, and no matter people's ability. As architects, we're often seen as people who come up with a design that fits within the site, a building within the site. We're often judged by, our success is often judged by the yield that we're able to achieve. In reality, architecture is a lot more than is about a lot more than just what you're able to fit and what the end product is in terms of yield. Architecture looks at how spaces can be used, spaces can be seen, how end users can experience each individual space. With regards to people helping people, this has led to allow us to think more flexibly. The base controls that we're used to looking at when designing a residential flat building, as an example, is the ADG, which is the Apartment Design Guide, which has your typical controls in terms of accessibility and livable apartments. But with the NDIS scheme and people helping people, we've started to take it a step beyond that. Not just about typology of units and providing units with different shapes and proportions and sizes. It's about how these spaces can be flexibly used. For example, pre-adaptable and post-adaptable, how one design can be
catered for both.
Catered for both, depending on who the end user is.
Without the need for knocking down walls or changing plumbing, or just having a provision like the other designs or let's say other practices do.
The ability to be able to provision for something at an early stage during construction provides that flexibility for not only the builder and the developer, but it allows for flexibility for the end user. Whether it's a disabled person or someone that has a walker or someone that has a carer within their apartment or not. So as I mentioned, you've got your base controls, and then you've got the high physical support, which are the most extreme out of all controls. With those in mind, the world's your oyster. You can take one design and apply it to another, and whether it's NDIS apartments or not, you can take the same principles and apply them depending on who the end user is and what their abilities.
Yeah. So George, working with you and your team for the last, I think, 10 years, I noticed that you don't look at it from only a commercial point of view, like most of other let's say practices or firms. When you have a project to develop, and specifically starting from the design stage, you dive deep to provide the best amenity, not only looking at the commercial aspect of it and how much of a yield it's gonna generate to the developer. And I also noticed that sometimes when the developer is sitting with you, what they care about is how much can I generate, how many units can I squeeze in this development, but your direction diverted in a good way to provide better amenity, better service. So I've noticed that, and maybe you can explain a bit more on this.
As professionals, we always we'd like to provide the best outcome for the clients, whether they know much about what we're doing or not. With regards to amenity and some of the items that you talked about, as I mentioned, there are controls that talk about minimums in terms of 70% solar access, 60% cross-flow ventilation, number of south-facing units, communal open spaces as a percentage, say 25%. We take these as base controls. Where possible, we'd like to maximize solar, north-facing units. Having lived in a unit for some time, I can see the benefits in having cross-flow ventilated north-facing units. And if I could avoid south-facing units, in all cases I would, because in the end, they're not great spaces for the end user. So good points there that you mentioned, and these are not things that your typical developers or your everyday people are aware of. In the end, as you rightly mentioned, they look at the overall numbers and not so much what's the experience that the person who's going to buy the unit going to feel.
Which create the impact eventually not only one individual person, but also on the whole family and the community.
Not only that, it helps them with the marketing, providing good amenity and additional services as part of your communal open spaces. These are all positive attributes to the building, which the end user looks for when purchasing or looking to rent the apartment. Whether it's a barbecue area, swimming pool, being on the rooftop,
communal lounge, and
whether it's indoor or outdoor. Sometimes sometimes people have to sacrifice a number of units to create better spaces. Sometimes the building screams for indoor communal room. In the end, this is GFA, but depending on the number of occupants in the building, in the end, there might be certain needs in one building that are different to others, for example.
Thank you for the detailed response. I think also when you're designing the SDA apartments, you don't look at, I've noticed that several times, that you guys don't look at only the basic SDA standards. You go not only one step, sometimes 2 steps ahead to provide the best practice. So could you please maybe give us 1 or 2 examples on, like, let's say, what sort of allowance and how do you look at the overall SDA, let's say, apartment?
Having gone through it a number of times now, we understand the constraints. I would say to a bit of a different level now. With the NDIS constraints, there's not as much tolerance, and with common practice, common construction methods, we're starting to see where people make small mistakes on site, which could become costly in the end, because it might be too late to strip back and rebuild, rectify. So allowing a little bit of tolerance at an early stage is always a positive. Rather than having your standard width, always allow a certain percentage as tolerance. The efficiency at the early stages is pretty much what is the most beneficial in the end. If you're thinking 2 steps ahead by what would if you look at latch clearances, you look at compliance numbers overall, I think you're able to look at the overall approach and tackle all these issues simultaneously, rather than have one issue here which leads to another issue there, and how can I resolve it? If you look at issues individually rather than holistically, it might be a less efficient way to come up with a successful design, which might end up not being what the intention is in the end.
Yeah. So in addition to what you said, I think we had the chance to work with you also directly with SDA providers who have their own, let's say, standards above and beyond the SDA standards, which you guys catered for. And I think you went 1 step ahead by, let's say, having assistive tech in the apartments and the adoption of, let's say, adjustable benches across the whole kitchen bench, instead of limiting it to just the compliance matter of the 900 bench. So you catered for that. You made sure that, I think, having structural walls behind the kitchen benches to have the weight of the bench, and assistive technology with the voice recognition stuff that also was adopted at Urban Property Group Development.
Yeah, we don't always like to offer and tell our clients this is the only way to design, because there's many different ways to come up with a compliant solution, and not just looking at the minimum. So it all comes down to the brief and the request from the clients, what they're looking to do in the end. Are they looking for a kind of a streamlined minimum, or are they looking to provide a little bit more? These things might not only be implemented in NDIS apartments. As I mentioned before, some of these principles, a lot of developers are looking to start applying them onto maybe a large portion of their apartments, rather than just the NDIS ones. So again, designing with flexibility. Now that the constraints, we're beyond that hurdle of whether it can be done or not. I think with the design approach that we're taking, and more people being able to deliver these kind of construction methodologies, it's opened up not only people's eyes but also the developers' eyes in terms of, should I only do the minimum, or should I go a little bit more beyond that?
Yeah. In relation to that topic, and as you know, in the recent few years ago, actually, the Design and Building Practitioner Act was implemented, and there was a transitioning phase between active projects and, let's say, approved projects that got stuck in that phase, and a lot of people faced a lot of challenges. So could you please tell us about the challenges that UrbanLink faced, and how did you overcome these challenges?
As you correctly mentioned there, Rami, the transitional period of when the Act first came in was the most challenging part, not only for us, but for our clients, or most of our clients. These clients have come with the mind frame that project is going to take a certain amount of time, program is 3 months, this is what it's going to cost, these are the consultants I need to engage. They soon came to realize that with the Act in place, there's a lot more involved. Interest rates being charged, holding costs, the program is a lot more than what they anticipated. As a company, being a design company, we started to learn that these things take longer than expected, but those transitional projects were the hardest because in terms of mind frame of clients, it was very hard for us to convince them that they have to let go of their old selves and move on to something else. Otherwise, they might not make it through. And a lot of people didn't make it through. We're seeing that the people who are adapting to the change are the only ones that are still working today. In today's world, these builders, I think they have now adapted in terms of timeframes, program, cost of consultants. They're used to paying X amount per unit. That time frame has completely changed.
Yeah, so from what I understand is that it had an impact on time, costs, and delivery. So the delivery, it means also human resources. I believe that when we were working together on a lot of jobs, we noticed that you guys made sure that the quality is consistent. Therefore, you stop taking any new projects on board until the current ones are completed. And what happened is that we made sure that we go and review the plans on several occasions in any change that happens in order to ensure that they are consistent for the final declaration.
That's exactly right. Prior to the Act, UrbanLink was taking on more projects than we currently are under the Act because, as you mentioned there, human resources is a very important thing to consider. How many people need to be on the project? Who signs off on the project? What are the steps taken to ensure that the quality, the QR checks, the project management between us as consultants, the builder, the number of stakeholders involved has increased dramatically from prior to the Act to now. So a lot's changed rather than just the cost to build. The quality of drawings has improved across the whole industry. The standards, people are referring a lot more to the standards, whereas in the past a lot of people maybe only had access to certain parts of the standards. Now these standards are not new. Potentially people didn't
adhere to it in fully, or they didn't,
or weren't even aware.
Yeah.
There are clients still learning that certain things have to be done in a certain way, even though a lot of their mentalities like I've always done it the right way, this is how I've done it.
Correct. Yeah, we heard that a lot.
Whereas in fact, given that they've always done it a certain way, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's the right way. Some of them have recently found out that they've always been doing it the wrong way. And maybe the industry, the way it should be, isn't for them. But they've had to learn that the hard way.
It separated also let's say, which is something we regret to say, that we had bad people in the industry, not only as a builders, we're talking about as all aspects, from engineers to consultants to builders to architects, developers, whatever. a lot of people manage to, adapt,
Yes.
change their mentality, and cater for this change in a positive way, which, as we said earlier, it reflects on the community overall, and not only as an individual, because eventually the final product that we now witnessing is much more beneficial to everyone and much more quality designed and executed.
We're seeing less mistakes happen on site. We're seeing people come back to us with more RFIs, which is something that we always pushed our clients to do. But in fact, they never wanted to, a lot of them didn't want to pay for the service at the time because they're happy to be provided with the minimum and for them to let themselves do the rest.
Yep.
Now, in terms of the Act, I think the main thing is the implications that were imposed on not only the builders but also on the design practitioners. A lot of the design practitioners were themselves in the mind frame that this is the minimum I need to provide and it's sufficient for approval and I don't need to be involved with the rest. Once these once the Act has come in and these implications have come in, they can no longer have that mind frame because everyone is responsible for their own drawings and everyone's responsible and has
Take
liability.
ownership.
They have to take ownership as professionals, and unfortunately that's filtered out the best from the rest. Some people either have continued and will continue and others have stopped.
Yeah. So George, this will lead me to my next question on how do you believe providing high quality design such as high quality NDIS apartment will enhance people's lives and provide a better community?
Yes, I think it's providing NDIS apartments is a perfect example of how architecture can be pushed outside the boundary to provide housing beyond what we see as normal. When it comes to occupants residing in NDIS apartments, it makes them feel like they're part of the community, they're part of a bigger picture rather than kind of individually living. They're living within a residential flat building, for example. They feel like they're part of something a little bit bigger. They take ownership. This is my home. I'm able to do. It bridges the gap between them and the people around them.
Yeah, they also, as you said, it's their home that they will reside there forever, because that quality design will give them the privilege to reside there without thinking even to leave the premises and waste their energy or effort trying to find a different property to suit their needs, because you already captured not only the basic stuff for them, but you went above and beyond the normal standards in the quality execution and delivery.
And not only that, having access to public open spaces and other amenities in the building, it means that it's within their doorstep. The building's fully accessible. They don't have to think twice about how am I going to get there. Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be accessible? That issue is all resolved because when designing a building for whether it's NDIS compliant or not, we're looking at accessibility as a whole. With NDIS participants within the building, that's already captured.
Yeah. So how do you think Access Link Consulting added value to Urban Link Architects with its team members and enhanced inclusion, design and accessibility? And how did we also manage to develop the awareness of the architects in accessibility?
In principle, Access Link doesn't only highlight the issue, but they also tell you the relevant codes where that issue comes from, so that it helps you as a designer moving forward to get it right in the first place. So you learn from your mistakes rather than, I know as access consultants you can't provide solutions, but you are able to tell us what the issue is and where the issue comes from. And that in itself helps us as designers to try and avoid that issue on a separate matter. Now, in terms of what Access Link provides to us as design consultants, that I feel that separates from other access consultants is how awareness is raised and not being able to not only being able to assess, as I mentioned, livable and accessible apartments as per the minimums. There are other programs out there that you're offering, brochures, marketing. There's different ways that, that are helping us in terms of our awareness when it comes to high physical support, robust, understanding the differences between each of the NDIS levels.
Yeah, yeah. To conclude, what advice would you give to the new generation, let's say graduate architects, that they want to participate and become registered architect, and to an existing architect in this current environment?
The first thing I'd like to say is, because I went through it myself, going through uni, and you're often taught how to think and not so much what the controls are. Coming out of uni, a lot of people start thinking about sculptural forms and how a building could look good, and they don't really take into consideration the key parameters in designing a building. Key planning controls, development controls like your height, your FSRs. That would be a good start for someone to try and understand, where do I find this information? How do I get access to it? Is it free? Do I need to buy it? Does it apply to my site? What's the difference between this zoning and that zoning? How does my setbacks apply? So that's one of the things. The other thing is to be very mindful of the client's brief. A lot of people, they have something in mind already before the clients come to them with a brief, and they seem to be a little bit more resistant to change. As a designer, you have to be very open-minded and willing to keep trying until you get the solution that works best for the client and for the site. When it comes to efficiency, a bit of advice that I'd like to give people is perhaps coming back to the controls, not developing the drawings to a stage where everything's ready and then go to consultants such as Access and BCA and traffic, and then realizing that, for example, there's something that they could have resolved a lot earlier. I think when it comes to efficiency, it's very important to try and digest and understand the controls at a very early stage. And as I said originally with the NDIS apartments, you can't tackle the issues kind of individually. You have to try and get a holistic understanding of what consultants are required, what does the standard say, what does the BCA say, what has the Act implemented, and allow for almost everything at the beginning. The later you leave these issues, the harder it becomes to resolve. Not providing the appropriate services at an earlier stage, as an example, and trying to adapt them later. The design intention might be lost. The intent of the design, you might lose what you're originally going for, and that's something that's very important. I've experienced that many times where people have something in mind, they design something that looks amazing. The project goes out to consultants, and when the planner sees it, it comes back. The building is not, it's not compliant with key and basic planning controls that could have been, that could have been avoided at the beginning.
So what I understand from you also is that, and I witnessed that myself, is that a lot of designers, i.e. architects, they don't coordinate well enough at the initial design stage, which the development application submission, let's say. So they do coordinate, but not to the extent of making the building ready. So once it's approved, there is only a coordination phase that the project goes through in order to make it, fully compliant and declare the design. But they go with the basic information just to rush the submission and make the building look nice internally and externally, without taking into consideration all the key elements like structure, services, which will then impact accessibility.
Yes.
Provisions. And we're witnessing that a lot. Recently, the mindset changed, as you just hinted on earlier, but we're still facing difficulties with people who's willing to take that step and adhering to our comments. So we make sure to comment in our reviews on, let's say, head height clearances in adaptable parking spaces. Like we can see that the plans, showing 200 mil slab thicknesses where no services, no sprinklers, no mechanical ducting running on the actual plans we receive. And when we raise the question with certain architects, they say it's too early to think of this. We're going to look into it at the CC stage. So that's where we come in and we say, look, guys, it's very important that you cater for this. Unfortunately, we can't enforce it on them because, eventually it's their duty to take the liability and ownership on the job with the other services. But we raise it, we adhere to it. But with you guys and other good architects that we're dealing with as well, which they're doing a great job as well, they take that on board. They understand how it works, and they take that one step ahead or further in making sure that all services is catered for at the initial design stage.
Yeah, it's very important at an early stage to consider all aspects of design and keeping these things in the back of your mind. When it comes to accessibility, for example, as you mentioned there, how many disabled cars, what are the required heights, what are the spaces that are required to be accessible? For example, communal open space, bulky waste rooms. How do the tenants take their rubbish out? Are there chutes? Are there bins? How is this being collected? How many lifts? Is this enough? Rooftop access, etc. Is there a step down? Is there, all the way, not only at the A stage, but, with NDIS apartments, how do you access your balcony? Do you have linear drains? Do you remove step downs completely? What other issues arise because of, one solution? Are there things that you need to work with other consultants to try and resolve, or is this something that is purely access? What happens, in a building where there's a lot of wind-driven rain? You might require larger hobs and step-downs. What happens there in terms of accessibility? Does it become a hazard in terms of a trip hazard? But also in terms of handrails, extensions, a lot of these things are often missed, especially at the A stages. And not only aesthetically, they can start to not appear very nice, but they often don't work, and they often lead to more applications back to council, which, as we mentioned, these things should be captured at an early stage. And
or non-compliances that might trigger a lot of performance solutions that we really, dislike to attend to, and we try to avoid.
Most importantly, the ground floor plane for me, it's something that I've started to consider of high importance a lot more as an urban designer. Often the capping beam, as an example, is poured slightly higher than it needs to be, and you see buildings that have a single step on the boundary, which is a non-compliance. But apart from it being a non-compliance and a performance solution, you often see these things become a trip hazard. If someone's walking on the street, say a blind person's walking on the street, it's not only a nuisance, but it doesn't continue the activation of the street. Whereas, as I mentioned, if the ground floor is the most important plane, you want to create kind of you want to have. Sometimes the idea is to go to define the boundary, and sometimes the idea is to blur the difference between what's your site and what's not your site. So connection to public domain is important, especially if you have ground floor activation like cafes and whatnot.
I completely agree with that, and not everyone will look deep enough to analyze what you just said. And I'm really grateful to have you here today. Thank you so much, George, for coming, and thank you for all the awareness that Urban Link architects are spreading and delivering quality apartments to the overall community. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rami. Thank you again for having me, and would love to continue working with you in the near future and the extensive future.
Thank you.